Our show starts in less than 2 minutes. Greetings, listeners. We would like to invite you to sleep with us.
No.
So crawl under the covers.
No.
What?
We are not inviting anyone to sleep with us. What in the world, Lorenzo?
What's the matter?
Well, the matter is this is a family-friendly show. When you go around inviting people to sleep with us, well, they're going to get the wrong idea. What is the idea anyway?
A marketing ploy.
Marketing ploy?
Yes, you said it yourself. Our show is the cure for insomnia.
Well, yeah, I did say that.
Well, people that can't sleep can tune in.
Oh, I see. And fall asleep while we're talking.
While you're talking, yes. That's how we can sell our show, as a sleep aid.
Yeah, that's not quite what I had in mind when I was dreaming up this show.
It's called promotion.
A sleep aid, huh? Do you really think that's the only reason somebody would listen to us?
To you, yes.
Wait, what do you mean to me?
You do go an and an.
No, that's definitely not true. Is it true?
Sometimes.
I do?
A little bit, but I don't mind. Much.
Well, maybe you put people to sleep too, Lorenzo.
Never.
Good evening, folks. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family. Did you fail to dress up for tonight's show? No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family, bring your friends. A gay, pleasant evening for all. We hope you have a wonderful time. Come back soon.
This week, we're deviating a bit from our original flight plan. When I set out on this series, my intent was, well, and actually it still is, to study the great movies of Hollywood's golden era, to see if I think they're great, and to look at what makes them great. Our movie today, 1943's Flesh and Fantasy, is not great, but it is fun. So why not go where the fun takes us and do a little exploring? This is actually part one of a double feature. Today we're going to be focused on Flesh and Fantasy, but next week we're going to take a look at its precursor, 1942's Tales of Manhattan. If you like Twilight Zone-y type anthologies, well, this one's for you. We're journeying into a wondrous land of imagination on this week's episode of the Vintage Century Idle Hour.
Please welcome our host, Jennifer Passariello.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Hey, how's your week been going?
Okay,
Do you have any news, anything noteworthy going on?
I just started reading a new book.
Oh yeah? Me too.
What book are you reading? Maybe we are reading the same one.
Oh, wouldn't that be fun? If we were reading the same book, we could talk about it together.
I know you like to talk about everything.
Yeah, well, I'll go first. I just started reading The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper by Roland Allen.
Oh, I'm definitely not reading that.
No? Well, so far it's pretty good. I mean, it's all about how people in history have used notebooks and journals to fuel creative thinking.
Oh,
You've probably noticed all the notebooks that I have on my desk.
yes, they are everywhere.
Well, I mean, I really only have 3. I keep a faith-based commonplace book for my things about prayer and faith journey. I keep a learning journal for random things that I learn and I want to use someday. And then, of course, I keep a notebook for my ideas for this show.
Oh,
You know, I spend a lot of time every week with my notebooks, and I really enjoy it. Yeah, so my hope for this book by Roland Allen is that I get some new ideas for how to use the notebooks that I already have.
I don't like that kind of book.
Oh, no?
No.
Well, what book are you reading, Lorenzo?
The Flame and the Flower.
The Flame and the Flower. Is that... Let me take a look at that. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's a romance novel. The Flame and the Flower by Kathleen Woodwis.
Yes. It's a classic.
A classic?
Yes. And very moving.
Wow. Well, can you read us a passage? Maybe give us a flavor for this classic?
Of course. Their love was a fire that could not be extinguished. It burned bright even in the darkest of nights. She was the flame, and he was the flower. Together they made a perfect storm of passion. She was wild and untamed. She was a tempest that could not be controlled.
A wild, untamed tempest.
Ah, yes. I hope one day to meet a lady like this.
You know, Lorenzo, there are so many great books out there. I hope you read other things too.
Could there ever be a better book than The Flame and the Flower?
100% yes.
I don't believe it.
Believe it, Lorenzo. Believe it. This week's Silver Screen Adventure takes us to some kind of strange places. Flesh and Fantasy is an anthology of uncanny stories. Now, there are actually 3 stories in this film, and we're going to get to those when we do our review. But let's talk a little bit about the structure of this film first. All of the stories have one thing in common. They rely on a storytelling device called the plot twist. Yeah, I know you're already familiar with plot twists. I mean, if you've seen the 1999 film The Sixth Sense, well, you're already familiar with what may be the most famous and shocking plot twist of all time. At least it was at the time of its release. But plot twists aren't all that rare. A lot of my favorite stories have them. One of my favorite plot twists in film, besides The Sixth Sense, is the twist in the 2001 film The Others. I love a good ghost story, and here we have 2 of them, The Sixth Sense and The Others, and both of those stories have intriguing and surprising plot twists. So, what is a plot twist? Let's nail down a solid definition. A plot twist is an unforeseen shift in the plot line that alters the audience's prior expectations of the story and reconfigures what they thought the meaning of the story was. In short, it's a surprising development. Plot twists sort of create this narrative whiplash. When a plot twist is really good, it sort of creates that same feeling as that carnival ride that I love. What is the name of that ride? Oh, the Scrambler. Do you know what ride I'm talking about? You'll see them at state fairs, and sometimes you'll find them in theme parks where you get in this little car and you're moving in one direction, and then all of a sudden, shazam, you're moving in another direction. I love that kind of ride. And when we've got a really good plot twist in a story, it creates that same kind of feeling. Now, the problem with plot twists in this day and age is we've almost come to expect them. Audiences today are a lot more sophisticated than the audiences of 1943. I mean, sometimes we can see a plot twist coming from a mile away, in which case the surprise element is gone. But even if we aren't always surprised by a plot twist, they can still be a lot of fun because they can still create suspense, even if all that suspense is for is to help us figure out if we're right in our guesses or not. Now, I just sort of brainstormed some common plot twists that I've seen in stories. There are many more than this, but, again, here are just a few examples. They were dead all along. Okay, that's sort of a reference to The Sixth Sense and The Others. Many stories have that kind of a plot twist. Here's another one. The bad guy was really a hero. The mean, crusty person really has a heart of gold. It was all just a dream. Then we may have a plot twist where circumstances radically disrupt the plan. Or maybe then a miracle happens. Or we find that fate will not be denied. Or how about this one? She's actually a mannequin. Now, I know that one is kind of specific. I'm sort of referring here to a Twilight Zone episode. There was a Twilight Zone episode called The After Hours, and the plot twist there was that this main character was actually a mannequin. Twilight Zone is loaded with plot twists. Okay, well, there are many more examples that we could come up with, but the point is, plot twists are fun, which brings us back to flesh and fantasy, which, listen, it's not intended to be great art. This is not a masterpiece, but it's a fun ride. Okay, so let's get to the stars of this show. The bigger names here include Edward G. Robinson, Charles Boyer, Robert Cummings, Barbara Stanwyck, Betty Field, and Thomas Mitchell. Our director here is Julien Duvivier. And now, how about the Academy Award stats? No Academy Award stats for this one. No real critical acclaim that I can find. Apparently, Duvivier was inspired to do this film by the success of his other anthology film, Tales of Manhattan, that had come out in 1942. Remember, we're going to visit Tales of Manhattan in next week's episode. Okay, so there's some backstory on our film this week. Let's take a brief musical break. And, we have weird tales this week, so I'm going to see if I can find some weird music. Anyway, when we come back, we'll do a deep dive into the 1943 film, Flesh and Fantasy.
Attention listeners, may I please have your attention? The following section of our show contains a number of spoilers.
Yeah, folks, there will be spoilers, as usual. I'm kind of famous for my spoilers, but this time I'm not going to give everything away. These stories don't have a lot of depth to them beyond the fun plot twist, so, if you want to watch the film, I'm going to leave those plot twists for your discovery for the most part. Some of the movies that we've covered in this series are so deep that even if you know what the plot line is, it's still worth watching. But Flesh and Fantasy doesn't have a lot of layers. It's just a fun film. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to only do a deep dive into one of the stories. Okay, so I'll briefly describe the three stories. For two of those stories, I won't give away the plot twist, but for the third one, I will. So if you want to completely skip this section and just get to my rating, you can do that. But that's how I'm going to kind of do the review this time around. Now, there is a frame for the stories in this film. In the opening scene, we see two men in the library of a gentleman's club talking. One man's been having this kind of crazy dream, and they start talking about it, and the other man says, "Hey, I've just read a book of strange stories that sort of pertain to your situation." And then he starts reading these stories to this other gentleman. It's kind of a weird frame, to be honest. I don't think it's necessary in this film, but they also do provide a little bit of commentary about the stories, so it is what it is. But anyway, let's talk about our three stories. So, story number one is called The Masked Ball. And I'm going to set that one aside because that's the story that we're going to go all in on. It's my favorite of the three, so we're going to spend a little bit more time with that one. Story number two is called The Palm Reader's Prophecy. So, in this story, a psychic palm reader is at a party, and he's making some very eerie predictions that seem like there's no way they could come true, but they do come true. Okay, that's not the plot twist. So, in one of the guest palms, he does a palm reading, and in one of the guest palms, he finds a very disturbing future. Okay, so this guest's name is Marshall Tyler, and he discovers in reading this guy's palm that Tyler is going to kill someone. Now, this is very alarming to Tyler, and he becomes obsessed with this idea. He can't sleep, he can't work, he can't focus because all he's thinking about is the fact that he's going to kill somebody. So he decides that the answer to this problem is let's just get it over with. He wants to find somebody to kill, get it over with, and move on with his life. But who will he kill? That is the question that's answered with our plot twist. But this is as far as we're going to go with this story, so you'll just have to watch to find out. Okay, for story number three, we've got The High Wire Dream. And in this story, we've got a circus performer. He's billed as the drunken gentleman of the high wire. So that's right, he's a high wire walker. He's got kind of this little shtick that he does where he walks out, he's got a tuxedo on, he holds a wine bottle and he pretends like he's drunk and very wobbly. And then he gets on the high wire act. Okay, well, this guy has a dream. And the dream is that he falls right in the middle of his act. So he falls off the high wire. He sees this woman with very distinct and unusual earrings scream. Okay, so he associates himself falling off the high wire with this woman wearing these earrings. Okay, well, he is so disturbed by this dream that he starts losing his confidence on the wire. He starts to, doubt his ability to do his signature move. So his signature move is he's on one high wire and then he jumps down to a second wire that's 10 feet below, and he does this without a net. Now, apparently he's done this a million times. He's done it successfully, but now all of a sudden he's afraid. He doesn't trust himself. He associates the dream, the fall, and this woman all together. Well, wouldn't you know, he's on a ship and he encounters that woman in real life. She's got the earrings, it's a whole thing. So this is definitely the woman. Well, they fall in love. They have this love affair. So our question is she bad luck? Are their fates intertwined? Well, you'll have to watch to find out. Now, stories 2 and 3 are similar in that they explore this question of whether we're in control of our destinies or not. In the palm reader's prophecy, a man is told that he's going to kill somebody. Well, he ultimately does kill someone. All right, that's not the spoiler. Okay, that's not the spoiler. That's not the important part of the story. But he does kill somebody, right? And when he does kill this person, he says, It wasn't his fault. It was written in his palm, and therefore his fate was sealed. There was some strange thing within him, he says, that forced his hand. But is that true? Well, if it is true, then we don't have any agency. We're just pawns, right? But of course, that isn't true. He had choices at every step. In the high wire dream, the circus performer's dream is a kind of prophecy. And in that dream, he falls, he sees a woman scream. So is it inevitable that when these two things come together, the high wire and the woman screaming, that tragedy will ensue? In both of these stories, the men try in their own ways to take some semblance of control over their destinies with very differing results. Okay, but what about the masked ball story? This one is kind of an odd outlier. It's very different. It doesn't deal with that kind of theme. And to be honest, it's inferior to the other two stories. I think the other two stories are better. They're more interesting in some ways. And yet, I like this one the best. I like the masked ball story the best. It's got kind of a fairy tale quality to it. Every time I see clips of Flesh and Fantasy, or I see pictures, movie stills from the film, they're always taken from the masked ball. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's kind of a weird setting. People are wearing masks. It's kind of unsettling. It's Mardi Gras. There's a lot of drama, a lot of interesting visuals there. And maybe that's part of why I like this one so much too. But it also has kind of a Cinderella type quality to the story as well. So anyway, this is the one we're going to do our little deep dive in. All right, so when this story opens, we meet Henrietta. And Henrietta is a lonely seamstress. She's kind of homely, she's poor, and she's kind of bitter. She doesn't have the greatest personality. Well, Henrietta is secretly in love with this young law student who's very moody, to be honest, and handsome. And he's completely oblivious when it comes to Henrietta. Apparently, they encounter each other in the square every day, but he doesn't even notice her. He doesn't see her. Now, there's this unsettling little episode at the beginning of this story where a drowned man is pulled out of the water. And then a crowd kind of gathers to see, what's going on here. So Henrietta and the law student end up standing side by side. Well, bless her little heart, she tries to make some small talk with him. She smiles at him. He pretty much just ignores her. And she begins to think that maybe the drowned man is on to something, that maybe he's the lucky one because he's dead. Well, she's about to jump in and drown herself when, all of a sudden, a mysterious man shows up. He gives her a mask of a beautiful woman, and he tells her to wear it to the masked ball. But she must return it at midnight. Okay, well, so she puts on this mask of this beautiful woman, so at least for a few hours, she can look pretty. She's got the mask. She decides to wear one of the dresses that she's been working on for one of her clients, so she's got a beautiful gown on. She walks around. People are commenting on how beautiful she is. Now, this is a bit strange, I have to say, because she's very obviously wearing a mask. Her mouth is not moving. We can see that she's got like these rubber band things keeping the mask on, so everybody can see that this is a mask. And yet they're treating her as if she looks like the mask that she's wearing. They have no idea what she looks like underneath that mask. But anyway, we can see that people are starting to treat her differently than they've treated her before. Before she was invisible. Now she's not. People are seeing her. Well, the longer that she's wearing this mask, the more we see her personality start to change. Oh, and I should also mention that she encounters a law student, and he also is now taken with her. So suddenly he's noticing her, right? Because she's wearing this mask. Well, her personality starts to change dramatically. There's a softness to her now. That bitterness is gone. And now we see this very kind, selfless person with a heart of gold. They fall in love. Yes, this is very sudden. They're only together for a couple of hours, but they fall in love. And she tells him at midnight that, beneath the mask, she's really ugly. He doesn't believe her. She removes the mask and, plot twist, she's not ugly after all. Her face has conformed to the beauty of the mask. Now, why has this happened? Because it was her selfishness and bitterness that was making her ugly. And when those were gone, her natural beauty could come out. At least that's what the story seems to be implying. But was it really just because she was bitter that she was unattractive? Or was it also because the people were treating her pretty badly? So, it's the case of what comes first. Her being treated badly and then becoming bitter, or her being bitter and that's why people were treating her badly. I don't know. But, when she has shed her bitterness, now she becomes pretty stunning and beautiful. Here's the interesting thing about this. She gets the law student in the end, but he's a creep. He totally ignored her when she was playing. So I don't know really what there is that's great about him. He's good looking, so she sees that in him. But other than that, I don't know. I don't think he's that great of a catch. Okay, now what about the mysterious stranger who gives her the mask? Well, we never really find out who he was, but we do see a mask of his face in a shop window. That's actually how the story ends. We'll never know who that man was. Now, in this case, I feel like we could all see the plot twist coming from a mile away. I've seen this whole face conforms to mask idea before. And here I have to make another reference to the Twilight Zone because that's just the way I do. There is a Twilight Zone episode called The Masks that also takes place during Mardi Gras, and the same thing happens. The people wearing their masks, their faces conform to those masks. But we have to remember that Flesh and Fantasy was first. We're in 1943 here. That Twilight Zone episode came out more than 20 years later. So the point goes to Flesh and Fantasy for that plot line. Okay, so here we have the stories of Flesh and Fantasy. Let's take a brief intermission, and then we'll get to my official review. Back in a moment.
Yes, folks, it's intermission time. So how about taking a break? Get out and stretch a little and relax before the show begins again. And why not make it refreshment time, too? We have lots of tasty, delicious treats waiting for you at the refreshment center. There's hot popcorn, so golden good and fresh out of the popper. And all kinds of refreshing ice-cold soft drinks. Sizzling hot dogs just bursting with juicy goodness. Ice cream so smooth and delicious, you'll hanker for more. Plus, all the most popular candy bars and many other favorite treats. So why not visit the refreshment center now? Our courteous attendants are ready and waiting to serve you with a wide and wonderful variety of good things to eat and drink. So step right up and make yourself at home.
Attention listeners, it is time to learn how Jennifer rates movies.
Our scale is pretty simple. We classify a film as either unwatchable, watchable, or rewatchable, or somewhere in between. An unwatchable film is really bad, so bad in fact that it's hard to sit through. It's either boring or stupid or cringy or just plain terrible. Now, a watchable film is one that's basically okay. It gives you something to do for a couple of hours, may have some interesting and entertaining parts, but it doesn't really leave a strong impression on you. A rewatchable film, on the other hand, is one that's so good, so meaningful, so impactful, so riveting, so thought-provoking, so emotionally charged, and/or so beautifully produced that you would invest the time necessary to watch it again. So there we have it, Our scale is unwatchable, watchable, or rewatchable. Now, I have a worksheet that helps me calculate the rating. I essentially award points, or what I call diamonds, to films based on 5 factors: story, character development, writing, so that would show up in a film as dialogue or narration, pace, and discussability. Now, when I'm considering discussability, what I'm basically doing is answering the question, does the story have enough depth to explore and analyze through discussion? Because, that's the fun part.
It's that it.
Yes. No. One last thing about my rating system.
I thought we were done.
This is my system. I'm not a film student. I don't really know anything about film. The factors I've built in are those that I care about. I don't watch or read other reviews, so nothing influences the way I feel about a film beyond the film itself.
It's that it.
One more last thing.
This overview is dragging on.
When reviewing a film, I try really hard to stay within the confines of the story. I don't consider the historical context of the film, when it was released, and I don't care about the biographies of the stars or the filmmakers or anything like that. The story itself is the thing that I care about.
It's that it.
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure of it. That's it.
Well, then, let's get on with the show.
For our rating, I'm making this simple and evaluating this film in its totality, not splitting it down by story. Now, the stories had different writers and different actors, of course, but they all have the same director, Julien Duvivier. So, let's break this down. Story. Was this an interesting and entertaining story worth telling? Yeah, sure, these were entertaining stories. There's nothing especially memorable about them, but they were fun. And they did make a run at allegory, so I'm going to give this 3 diamonds. Character development. Were the characters dimensional? Did their actions ring true? I'm going to go with 2 diamonds here, which I know is kind of a low rating. But these characters were really secondary to the plot twist in these stories. There wasn't a lot of dimension there. Writing. Was the dialogue beautiful, funny, poignant, and/or thought-provoking? Not really. There's nothing really memorable or special here. And a couple of the lines bordered on cheesy. So, for example, when Henrietta discovers that she's become beautiful beneath the mask, she tells the law student that the 2 of them had bumped into each other many times in the past. And when he says, "Gee, I wonder why I never saw you," she says, with great feeling, "Because I didn't see myself." Yeah, sort of cheesy. At the same time, there was nothing in the writing that got in the way of any of these stories, so I'm going to go with 3 diamonds, middle of the road. Pace. At what speed did the story unfold? I'm going to give this a 5 diamond rating. I thought the pace was really good. It was just right. Each story is about 30 minutes long, which was appropriate. I think any longer or shorter would have been off a bit. So 5 diamonds on the pace. And then finally, discussability. Does the story have enough depth to explore and analyze through discussion? I'm given this 3 diamonds. There are a few prompts in here for discussion, but I think we covered most of them right here in this episode. There's not a whole lot more that we need to explore. So I'm going to say 3 diamonds, very limited discussability in my opinion. And that brings us to a score of 3.2 diamonds. That puts Flesh and Fantasy in the category of watchable.
And now it's time for Idel, our trivia.
Well, we introduced this segment in episode 6, and I kind of like it. It's fun, right?
How do you define fun?
Well, here's this week's question. One of the stories in Flesh and Fantasy, this would be the second one, the one with the guy who's told he's going to kill somebody, is based on a story entitled Lord Arthur Saville's Crime by 19th century Irish poet and playwright Oscar Wilde. Well, several films have been based on the work of Oscar Wilde. Here are 3 films from Hollywood's golden age. Which one is not based on a story by Oscar Wilde? A. 1938's The Lady Vanishes. B. 1944's The Canterville Ghost. Or C. 1945's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Take a moment to think this one through. Time's up. What do you think, Lorenzo? Which of the following was not based on a story by Oscar Wilde? A. The Lady Vanishes, B. The Canterville Ghost, or C. The Picture of Dorian Gray?
The question is too easy. You need to challenge the people more. You are insulting them.
Yeah, well, what's the answer?
I'm embarrassed by the question. But, of course, the answer is The Lady Vanishes. What's that sound?
That, my friend, signifies a wrong answer.
No way.
The Lady Vanishes is an Alfred Hitchcock film based on a novel by Ethel Lena White. That novel is called, let's see, what is it? Oh, The Wheel Spins. The Wheel Spins. So Oscar Wilde did not write that one. Hey, Lorenzo, I need to add this to our movie list. The Lady Vanishes. Hitchcock received the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Director for that film, and that was the only time he received an award for his directing. That's kind of hard to believe. Anyway, both The Canterville Ghost and The Picture of Dorian Gray were based on the work of Oscar Wilde. Now you know.
This is a stupid game.
We were just on the topic of Oscar Wilde. Well, that brings to mind my favorite short story written by him. It's the saddest, sweetest story, and it actually explores some pretty interesting themes. Now, some people regard this story as a comedy, and yeah, I guess it is kind of a dark comedy, but I just think it's beautiful and sad. It's called The Nightingale and the Rose, and it was included in Wilde's 1888 book of short stories called The Happy Prince and Other Tales. I thought I would read it.
Wait.
What? What is it?
Surely you're not going to read to the people.
Well, I thought I would.
Oh no.
What?
That is the very worst thing you can do in a podcast.
Is it?
Yes.
Well, where did you hear that?
On a podcast. They said that people don't like to be read to.
Maybe you misinterpreted them. I mean, what did they say exactly?
They said the words, do not ever, 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 under any circumstances, read to your audience.
Yeah, but they probably meant not to read boring things. This is not boring. This is a beautiful story.
They went on to say that it is better to die than to read to your audience.
Well, I'm doing it. I mean, listen, at this point of the show, people have probably already dropped off anyway.
What? No one is listening. Why do we do this show?
Please settle in, any listeners still with us, for Oscar Wilde's The Nightingale and the Rose. She said that she would dance with me if I brought her red roses, cried the young student. But in all my garden there is no red rose. From her nest in the oak tree, a nightingale heard him, and she looked out through the leaves and wondered. No red rose in all my garden, he cried, and his beautiful eyes filled with tears. Ah, on what little things does happiness depend? I have read all that the wise men have written, and all the secrets of philosophy are mine, yet for want of a red rose, my life is made wretched. Wait, Lorenzo, what is that sound?
The people are snoring.
You are just going to ruin my fun, aren't you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, listen, maybe this would be a good time for you to take a nap, Lorenzo. I'll wake you when it's over.
Okay.
Okay, back to the story. Here at last is a true lover, said the nightingale. Night after night have I sung of him, though I knew him not. Night after night have I told his story to the stars, and now I see him. His hair is dark as the hyacinth blossom, and his lips are as red as the rose of his desire. But passion has made his face like pale ivory, and sorrow has set her seal upon his brow. Oh, the prince gives a ball tomorrow night, murmured the young student, and my love will be with the company. If I bring her a red rose, she'll dance with me till dawn. If I bring her a red rose, I shall hold her in my arms, and she will lean her head upon my shoulder, and her hand will be clasped in mine. But there is no red rose in my garden, so I shall sit lonely, and she'll pass me by. She will have no heed of me, and my heart will break. Oh, here indeed is the true lover, said the nightingale. What I sing of he suffers. What is joy to me, to him is pain. Surely love is a wonderful thing. It's more precious than emeralds and dearer than fine opals. Pearls and pomegranates cannot buy it, nor is it set forth in the marketplace. It may not be purchased of the merchants, nor can it be weighed out in the balance for gold. Oh, the musicians will sit in their gallery, said the young student, and they'll play upon their stringed instruments, and my love will dance to the sound of the harp and the violin. She'll dance so lightly that her feet will not touch the floor, and the courtiers in their gay dresses will throng around her. But with me, she will not dance, for I have no red rose to give her. And he flung himself down on the grass and buried his face in his hands and wept. Why is he weeping? Asked a little green lizard as he ran past him with his tail in the air. Yeah, why indeed, said a butterfly who was fluttering about after a sunbeam. Why indeed, whispered a daisy to his neighbor in a soft voice. He's weeping for a red rose, said the nightingale. For a red rose, they cried. How very ridiculous. And the little lizard, who was something of a cynic, laughed outright. But the nightingale understood the secret of the student's sorrow. She sat silent in the oak tree and thought about the mystery of love. Suddenly, she spread her brown wings for flight and soared into the air. She passed through the grove like a shadow, and like a shadow, she sailed across the garden. In the center of the grass plot was standing a beautiful rose tree, and when she saw it, she flew over to it and lit upon a spray. Give me a red rose, she cried, and I will sing you my sweetest song. But the tree shook its head. My roses are white, it answered, as white as the foam of the sea, and whiter than the snow upon the mountain. But go to my brother who grows round the old sundial, and perhaps he will give you what you want. So the nightingale flew over to the rose tree that was growing by the old sundial. Give me a red rose, she cried, and I will sing you my sweetest song. But the tree shook its head. My roses are yellow, it answered, as yellow as the hair of a mermaiden who sits upon the amber throne, and yellower than the daffodil that blooms in the meadow before the mower comes with his scythe. But go to my brother who grows beneath the student's window, and perhaps he will give you what you want. So the nightingale flew over to the rose tree that was growing beneath the student's window. Give me a red rose, she cried, and I will sing you my sweetest song. But the tree shook his head. My roses are red, it answered, as red as the feet of the dove, and redder than the great fans of coral that wave and wave in the ocean cavern. But the winter has chilled my veins, and the frost has nipped my buds, and the storm has broken my branches, and I shall have no red roses this year at all. One red rose, that's all I want, cried the nightingale. Only one red rose. Is there no way by which I can get it? There is a way, answered the tree. Oh, but it's so terrible I dare not tell it to you. Tell it to me, said the nightingale. I'm not afraid. If you want a red rose, said the tree, you must build it out of music by moonlight and stain it with your own heart's blood. You must sing to me with your breast against a thorn. All night long you must sing to me, and the thorn must pierce your heart, and your lifeblood must flow into my veins and become mine. Death is a great price to pay for a red rose, cried the nightingale, and life is very dear to all. It's pleasant to sit in the green wood and to watch the sun in his chariot of gold and the moon in her chariot of pearl. Sweet is the scent of the hawthorn, and sweet are the bluebells that hide in the valley and the heather that blows on the hill. But love is better than life, and what is the heart of a bird compared to the heart of a man? So she spread her brown wings for flight and soared into the air. She swept over the garden like a shadow, and like a shadow she sailed through the grove. The young student was still lying on the grass where she left him, and the tears were not yet dry in his beautiful eyes. Be happy, cried the nightingale, be happy, you shall have your red rose. I will build it out of music by moonlight and stain it with my own heart's blood. All that I ask of you in return is that you will be a true lover, for love is wiser than philosophy, though she is wise, and mightier than power, though he is mighty. Flame-colored are his wings, and colored like flame is his body. His lips are sweet as honey, and his breath is like frankincense. The student looked up from the grass and listened, but he couldn't understand what the nightingale was saying to him, for he only knew the things that are written down in books. But the oak tree understood and felt sad, for he was very fond of the little nightingale who had built her nest in his branches. Sing me one last song, he whispered. I shall feel very lonely when you're gone. So the nightingale sang to the oak tree, and her voice was like water bubbling from a silver jar. When she had finished her song, the student got up and pulled the notebook out and a lead pencil from his pocket. She has form, he said to himself as he walked away through the grove. That cannot be denied to her. But has she got feeling? I'm afraid not. In fact, she's like most artists. She's all style without any sincerity. She wouldn't sacrifice herself for others. She thinks merely of music, and everybody knows that the arts are selfish. Still, it must be admitted that she has some beautiful notes in her voice. What a pity it is that they don't mean anything or do any practical good. And he went into his room, he lay down on his little bed, and he began to think of his love, and after a time he fell asleep. When the moon shone in the heavens, the nightingale flew to the rose tree and set her breast against the thorn. All night long she sang with her breast against the thorn, and the cold crystal moon leaned down and listened. All night long she sang, and the thorn went deeper and deeper into her breast, and her lifeblood ebbed away from her. She sang first of the birth of love in the heart of a boy and a girl, and on the topmost spray of the rose tree there blossomed a marvelous rose. Petal following petal, a song followed song. Pale was it at first, as the mist that hangs over the river, pale as the feet of the morning, and silver as the wings of the dawn. As the shadow of a rose in a mirror of silver, as the shadow of a rose in a water pool, so was the rose that blossomed on the topmost spray of the tree. But the tree cried to the nightingale to press closer against the thorn. Press closer, little nightingale, cried the tree, or the day will come before the rose is finished. So the nightingale pressed closer against the thorn, and louder grew her song, for she sang of the birth of passion in the soul of a man and a maid. And a delicate flush of pink came into the leaves of the rose, like the flush in the face of the bridegroom when he kisses the lips of the bride. But the thorn had not yet reached her heart, so the rose's heart remained white, for only a nightingale's heart's blood can crimson the heart of a rose. And the tree cried to the nightingale to press closer against the thorn. Press closer, little nightingale, cried the tree, or the day will come before the rose is finished." So the nightingale pressed closer against the thorn, and the thorn touched her heart, and a fierce pang of pain shot through her. Bitter, bitter was the pain, and wilder grew her song, for she sang of the love that is perfected by death, of the love that dies not in the tomb. And the marvelous rose became crimson, like the rose of the eastern sky. Crimson was the girdle of petals, and crimson as a ruby was the heart. But the nightingale's voice grew fainter, and her little wings began to beat, and a film came over her eyes. Fainter and fainter grew her song, and she felt something choking her in her throat. Then she gave one last burst of music. The white moon heard it, and she forgot the dawn and lingered on in the sky. The red rose heard it, and it trembled all over with ecstasy and opened its petals to the cold morning air. Echo bore it to the purple caverns in the hills and woke the sleeping shepherds from their dreams. It floated through the reeds of the river, and they carried its message to the sea. "Look, look," cried the tree, "the rose is finished now." But the nightingale made no answer, for she was lying dead in the long grass with the thorn in her heart. At noon, the student opened his window and looked out. "Why, what a wonderful piece of luck," he cried. "Here is a red rose. I have never seen any rose like it in all my life. It's so beautiful that I'm sure it has a long Latin name." And he leaned down and plucked it. Then he put on his hat and ran up to the professor's house with the rose in his hand. The daughter of the professor was sitting in the doorway, winding blue silk on a reel, and her little dog was lying at her feet. "You said that you would dance with me if I brought you a red rose," cried the student. "Here is the reddest rose in all the world. You'll wear it tonight next to your heart, and as we dance together, it will tell you how I love you." But the girl frowned. "Oh, I'm afraid this won't go with my dress," she answered. "And besides, the Chamberlain's nephew has sent me some real pearls, and everybody knows that jewels cost far more than flowers." "Well, upon my word, you're very ungrateful," said the student angrily, and he threw the rose into the street, where it fell into the gutter, and a cartwheel went over it. "Ungrateful?" said the girl. "I tell you what, you are very rude. And after all, who are you anyway? Only a student. Why, I don't believe you even got silver buckles on your shoes, as the Chamberlain's nephew has." Then she got up from her chair and went into the house. "What a silly thing love is," said the student as he walked away. "It's not half as useful as logic, and it doesn't prove anything. And it's always telling one of things that are not going to happen, and making one believe things that are not true. In fact, it's quite unpractical. And, as in this age, to be practical is everything, I shall go back to philosophy and study metaphysics." So he returned to his room, pulled out a great dusty book, and began to read. "Lorenzo. Lorenzo, wake up, Lorenzo. Lorenzo,
What?
I'm finished with the story."
Oh, I was having a crazy dream.
"A crazy dream?"
Yes, it was about a stupid young man who had no understanding of love.
Oh, Lorenzo. Well, it sounds like it's time to say goodbye. But hey, listeners, before we go, I'm not sure how you're finding this podcast, but it should be showing up on the major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. Now, I myself am a podcast addict. I listen to podcasts all the time, and I listen both on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube. Now, if you like to listen at night and you want like a soothing visual backdrop for the audio, go ahead and check out our channel on YouTube. It's the Vintage Century Idle Hour. If you just want the sound, well, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any of the other platforms, those will work as well. Well, thanks for hanging in there with us. Have a great week. And when your week is done, come on back and see us, won't you? Say goodbye, Lorenzo.
Goodbye, Lorenzo. Our show starts in less than 2 minutes. Greetings, listeners. We would like to invite you to sleep with us.
No.
So crawl under the covers.
No.
What?
We are not inviting anyone to sleep with us. What in the world, Lorenzo?
What's the matter?
Well, the matter is this is a family-friendly show. When you go around inviting people to sleep with us, well, you're going to get the wrong idea. What is the idea anyway?
A marketing ploy.
Marketing ploy?
Yes, you said it yourself. Our show is the cure for insomnia.
Well, yeah, I did say that.
Well, people that can't sleep can tune in.
Oh, I see. And fall asleep while we're talking.
While you're talking, yes. That's how we can sell our show, as a sleep aid.
Yeah, that's not quite what I had in mind when I was dreaming up this show.
It's called promotion.
A sleep aid, huh? Do you really think that's the only reason somebody would listen to us?
To you, yes.
Wait, what do you mean to me?
You do go and on.
No, that's definitely not true. Is it true?
Sometimes,
I do?
a little bit, but I don't mind. Much.
Well, maybe you put people to sleep too, Lorenzo.
Never.
Good evening, folks. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family. Did you fail to dress up for tonight's show? No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family, bring your friends. A gay, pleasant evening for all. We hope you have a wonderful time. Come back soon.
You know what's really great about anthology films? Variety. If you don't love one story, hang on, you might love the next one. Well, in our last episode, we explored the 1943 anthology Flesh and Fantasy, which introduced us to the director Julien Duvivier. Now, I'm no film historian or expert or anything really. I'm just a classic film enthusiast, and the name Julien Duvivier is one I didn't know. Well, this time around, we're going to explore another of Duvivier's films, Tales of Manhattan. Like Flesh and Fantasy, today's film is a mixed bag. There's a couple of really good stories, one that's okay, one that's extremely weird, and not in a cool way. Let's explore the film and its director on today's episode of the Vintage Century Idol Hour. Oh, thanks, Olive, for that introduction. Everyone meet Olive, my sweet little Maltese and sidekick. I guess she's our announcer today. Lorenzo doesn't seem to be around.
I'm right here. Olov just ran into the studio and started making noise.
Oh, hi, Lorenzo.
Olov is not the announcer.
Oh, I know, Lorenzo. I was just kidding.
I think she's trying to take my job.
Oh, for heaven's sake, Lorenzo, Olive is not trying to take your job. She just wants to be where the action is.
Is this where the action is?
Listeners, please meet Lorenzo, my AI-generated announcer and super fan. Well, you know, Lorenzo, Olive always watches the movies we feature on this show. We watch them together.
That doesn't make her an announcer.
Well, you don't watch the movies.
I watch some.
Did you watch Tales of Manhattan?
Of course.
You did? Well, which of the tales was your favorite?
The one about the man.
Which man?
The man with the hat.
The man with the hat. This is the 1940s, Lorenzo. All the men had hats. You didn't watch the movie, did you?
I watched the trailer. Same thing.
No, not the same thing. Olive, what was your favorite story? Oh, yeah? That was a good one. Good point, Olive. What an insightful observation.
What? What did she say?
Oh, Lorenzo, it wouldn't make any sense to you. You didn't watch the movie.
She's just making noise. Go away, Olive. I'm the announcer.
Well, listen, Lorenzo, it wouldn't hurt you to watch the movies we review each week.
We can't have two announcers on this show. It's in our contract.
Yeah, we don't have a contract. Oh, Olive, thank you for reminding me.
What did she say?
She just reminded me that Charles Boyer was in both Flesh and Fantasy and Tales of Manhattan.
I'll be back.
Where are you going, Lorenzo?
I'm going to go watch the movie.
What was that? I couldn't hear you.
I said I'm going to go watch the movie.
Oh, well, I think that's a good idea.
Go away, Olive. Go. You are not the announcer. Go away.
This week's Silver Screen Adventure takes us to the Isle of Manhattan for 5 separate stories, all linked together by a tailcoat. That's right, a tailcoat. You know, a formal jacket, what I would probably call a tuxedo jacket with long tails. Now, there's something unique about this particular tailcoat. It's cursed, and it has legs. It travels around this film from character to character, and it plays a part in each of the 5 stories that make up Tales of Manhattan. Oh, you know what just occurred to me? Oh my gosh, mind blower. This movie is called Tales of Manhattan. Tales as in stories, Tales. But it could have just as easily been called Tales of Manhattan, Tails, Tails, like the tails of the tailcoat. Is that an intended pun? Am I just kind of slow? I don't know. Anyway, the title is actually Tales, Tales. Well, we follow this tailcoat around, and as I said, it serves as the narrative device linking all of these stories together. Now, this is the second anthology film in our series from director Julien Duvivier. Tales of Manhattan came out first, and because it was successful, Flesh and Fantasy came out the following year. Now, of course, we covered Flesh and Fantasy last week. A couple of key differences to bear in mind about these two films. The stories in Flesh and Fantasy have some magical properties to them. Remember, we had the woman whose face changes beneath a Mardi Gras mask. Then we had that crazy foretelling of the man who was going to kill someone. We had that eerie woman in a circus performer's dream who showed up in real life. You know, these were not scary stories per se, but they did bend reality a little bit. Tales of Manhattan also makes full use of unexpected plot twists. But aside from the tailcoat curse, the stories are not eerie or magical. They're just sort of, I don't know, how would you describe them? Curiosities, let's call them that. Curiosities that could very believably play out in real life. Now, another key difference between Flesh and Fantasy and Tales of Manhattan is that Tales of Manhattan seem to have bigger, or if not bigger, at least more stars. Now, we'll get to a partial list of the main stars in this film in a moment, but just know there are a lot of them. There are a lot of characters here. Now, our director is Julien Duvivier. Who was this guy? And were anthologies his thing? Did he have a whole series of them? We know he did 2 of them. Well, the answer, as far as I can tell, is no. Looks like Tales of Manhattan and Flesh and Fantasy were the only two anthologies he directed. So who was he? Well, he was a French actor turned director whose most prominent work seemed to be produced between like 1930 and the early to mid 1940s. According to Wikipedia, his most noteworthy films were, and of course I'm going to mispronounce these, La Bandera, Pepe La Moca, or Pepe La Moco, Little World of Don Camillo, Panique, and that would be panic in English, Deadlier Than the Male, and this one's going to be hard, Marianne or Marianne de ma Jeunesse. Don't know what that means. But anyway, those are his most notable works. None of these sound familiar to me. But there is one other film that's at least associated with him that I should mention, and that film is Destiny. Destiny came out in 1944 and starred Gloria Jean in the lead role. It was originally supposed to be the opening story in Flesh and Fantasy. And apparently on its screening, it was considered pretty good. I mean, it got some good reviews. But the studio decided to edit that film down to the 3 stories that we discussed last week. So they shelved the Destiny story. They let it collect dust for a couple of years. Then they pulled it out and reworked it into a full-length feature film. Then it was also, by the way, given to another director. Now, as of this recording, I haven't seen Destiny, although I kind of feel like I should make some time for it, if for no other reason than to just sort of round out this mini-series. Apparently, it received, good critical reviews when it came out, although it was considered a B film at the time of its release. Okay, so let's get back to Tales of Manhattan. The theatrical release poster for this film lists 9 headliners, plus, has kind of a tagline here, plus 46 featured players. As I said, there were a lot of people in this movie. Now, let's take a look at the headliners. Charles Boyer and Edward G. Robinson. Now, they were also both in Flesh and Fantasy. Then we had Rita Hayworth, Ginger Rogers, Henry Fonda. There was kind of a surprise. Charles Lawton, Paul Robeson, Ethel Waters, and Rochester, another surprise. Now, some of you may not know who Rochester is. I had never seen him in a film, but I knew his voice. His voice is very familiar because he was on one of my favorite old-time radio shows, the Jack Benny program. Now, there are no Academy Award stats for this film. Just like Flesh and Fantasy, Tales of Manhattan is probably not going to make it on any World's Greatest Films list, but it is entertaining, and I actually think it's superior to Flesh and Fantasy. Okay, let's take a brief musical break, and when we come back, we'll begin our deep dive into 1942's Tales of Manhattan.
Attention listeners, may I please have your attention? The following section of our show contains a number of spoilers.
Yeah, we really do need to emphasize that there will be spoilers here, as there always are on this show. But just as I explained last week, when you know what the plot twists are in this film, there isn't really a lot more to sink your teeth into. So, I don't know, that could totally ruin the film for you. If you'd like to go and watch Tales of Manhattan before continuing this episode, you can find it out on YouTube where it's free to watch. But remember, if you leave us, please come back. All right, now having said all of that about the spoilers, I'm only going to ruin 2 of the stories for you. The others I'll just briefly describe, but I won't go into all the details. Okay, so let's get into it. The movie opens when we see Paul Orman, star of the stage, trying on a custom tailcoat that's been made just for him. Now, this is an exquisite coat of unmatched workmanship and quality. But the cutter of the garment got into a big argument with the tailor. I think the argument was about the lapels. It had something to do with the lapels. Well, the cutter was so angry that he stormed out of the shop, but not without placing a curse on the tailcoat. He said that the jacket would bring misfortune to anyone who wore it. Okay, now let's stop right there for a minute, because this does seem like kind of a shaky premise here. If the cutter is mad at the tailor, why would he curse the people who wore the jacket? The tailor isn't going to wear the jacket. I mean, if he's mad at the tailor, you would think he would put a curse on something that the tailor would use, not a bunch of random people that just happen to wear the jacket. But anyway, the jacket's cursed, and that serves as our primary narrative device to link these stories together. Now, the tailor, for his part, assures Mr. Orman that he thinks that the jacket's going to bring him good luck. Well, it doesn't really matter to Mr. Orman, because he says he's not superstitious. He doesn't care about that, so he takes the jacket and he wears it that night when he goes on stage. And that leads to our first story. Story number 1. Now, none of these stories seem to have titles, so I'm going to give them titles, and I'm going to call story number 1 Love Affair number 1, because we actually have 2 love affair stories here. Love Affair number 1 is our very first story in the lineup, but I'm going to set it aside for the moment because this is one of my favorites, and I want to spend a little bit more time with this one. So let's set it aside for the moment and go on to story number 2. Next up, we have what I'm calling Love Affair number 2. Now, in this story, we've got 2 characters. We've got Harry and Diane, and it is their wedding day. Diane's friend Ellen, who happens to be divorcing her own husband for cheating on her, she comes over to see Diane, and she's very upset about this whole divorce thing. Now, how did Ellen come to find out that her husband was cheating on her? Well, apparently she was going through her husband's coat pockets and found some evidence. And I can't remember if we know what the evidence was. It might have been like a handkerchief with lipstick on it, or a phone number or something. I honestly can't remember. But anyway, she finds something in her husband's pocket, gives away the game, and then she ends up divorcing him. Well, she tells Diane, you know what? You ought to go through Harry's coat pockets to see if he's got anything in there that you ought to know. Well, so she sees his formal jacket, And she starts going through the pockets, and at first, there's nothing in there that's of interest to her. And then she looks in an inside pocket, kind of a secret pocket. And what does she find in there? A love letter. And it's not from her. Okay, well, the fiance, Harry, he can see from the other room that she's going through his pockets and he's discovered this love letter. So he hatches this plan where he calls his friend, and his friend uh, comes and he claims that jacket as his own. And they come up with this thing where it's a mix up. They try to convince Diane that, oh no, that's not a love letter to him, to Harry. That's a love letter to his friend. Okay, I'm going to stop the story right there. You can, guess as to whether or not Diane bought that story and what happens next. It's actually a really cute story, and it does have a happy ending, but it's an unexpected happy ending. It does have a plot twist there, but it's kind of a fun story. And yeah, one of those jackets in this scenario is our tailcoat. All right, well, let's go now to story number 3. The tailcoat now ends up in a pawn shop, and it's purchased by a woman for her husband, who's an unknown classical music composer. Now, I'm going to call this story The Kindness of Strangers, and it's just so darn sweet that we have to spend more time with it. So I'm going to set this story aside too. We're going to come back around to it. All right, let's skip now to story number 4. I'm going to call this one Second Chances. The tailcoat ends up donated to a homeless shelter. Now, at this point, that tailcoat has been through the ringer. I mean, it is not looking fresh, to say the least, and it's torn. But they fix it up. There's a seamstress there at the shelter. She fixes up the jacket. And the head of the shelter, I think his name is Joe. Joe decides he wants to give this jacket to one of their residents, Larry Brown. Now, Larry Brown is in bad shape. He's an alcoholic panhandler. He's really down on his luck, completely homeless. He spends most of his days on the street. But we learn that he used to be a lawyer. And he was living quite a different life at one time, but because he got involved in some shady business dealings, his whole life fell apart. Now, the reason why Joe gives him the jacket is because Larry has been invited to his old college reunion. It's at the Waldorf Astoria, and it's really fancy, and he doesn't have anything to wear, so he thinks, hey, I'll give him this tailcoat, he can wear that. And he thinks it's important for him to go to this reunion because that may be the push he needs to turn his life around. Kind of remind him of his younger days and all of the potential that he had when he was a student. And then kind of meeting up with his old friends and everything. That might give him a fresh start. Okay, so the question is, does it give him a fresh start? Does that help him turn his life around? Well, you know what? I'm not going to tell you. You have to watch the movie to find out. But this, too, is a good story. It's a good one. It's not my favorite, but it is a pretty good story. Okay, now we get to one that's not a good one. This is the last story. And it's quite a departure from the other ones. I mean, it's just got the weirdest premise. And when I say weird, I like weird stories, but this is just not weird in a good way. What should I call this one? I'm going to call this story Answered Prayers. Okay, so here's the story. Our tailcoat has ended up once again in a second-hand shop, and it's actually stolen. So a robber breaks into the shop and he's looking around for something formal that he can wear because his plan is he's going to go into a casino and rob the gamblers at the casino, but they're all dressed up and he wants to blend in with all of these folks, so he needs a fancy jacket. Okay, well, he finds it. He finds the tailcoat. He steals it, and he goes to the casino and he holds them up. Now, I'll tell you, it's kind of neat. There's a neat little camera thing that they do here where, we don't see him actually pull a gun on the gamblers. We just see these women who are, I think they're at the roulette wheel, and we just see their hands, and we hear his voice say, stick them up, I think. And they freeze, their hands freeze. So it's kind of a neat way to do that, actually. But anyway, okay, so he gets off with all this money. I think it's like $40,000 or something. He makes his getaway, and part of his getaway is he ends up in a plane. So he's leaving the country. However, oh, and by the way, he's still wearing the tailcoat when he's in the plane. Somehow, the jacket ends up on fire. Okay? So he's in the plane. He throws the jacket out of the plane with thousands of dollars, right, that he's just stolen. And where does the jacket and all the money end up? Well, it falls from the sky onto this very poor community. So, literally money is falling from the sky, and this community needs it. They are poor. They're really struggling. And so the whole story is about what do they do with this money that has literally fallen from the sky? Okay, well, that's going to be a mystery for you to discover. We also learn in this story what the ultimate fate is of the jacket, and that's a little plot twist that you will not see coming. Kind of an odd end to the story. I don't love that one, but, I don't know. It just feels weirder than the other stories. I don't know. But we're going to leave that right there. Okay, so there we have our 5 stories in a nutshell, but I want to go back to one of my favorites, and that's that first story, the one that I call Love Affair Number 1. Now, remember Paul Orman? He was that stage actor who had the tailcoat made for him. He wore it on stage, and in the play that he was in that night, his character dies. So he's wearing that jacket. The woman that is playing opposite him shoots him. This is all part of the story, that they're acting out on stage. And he dies very dramatically wearing it. Okay, well, that play is a big hit, but he doesn't even stay long enough for his standing ovation. He runs out of there because he's going to meet up with a woman named Ethel Holloway. Now, Ethel is a woman that he had had an affair with. However, like a year ago, I guess, but since then, she's married. And, we start to see her in not a very favorable light. She's played, by the way, by Rita Hayworth, who looks stunning, by the way. But she's kind of an opportunist. We don't really know how she's playing it. She seems to be playing both her husband and this actor, Paul Orman. She kind of lies. She's manipulative. She seemed to kind of latch onto Paul because we learned that she tried to be an actress, and apparently she was not very good at it. But because she was in a relationship with him, he was able to get her, some opportunities to do some acting. Well, when the acting gig didn't really work out, she ended up marrying this other guy who was very wealthy. So it just seems like she's kind of an opportunist. We can't really take her seriously. She claims to love both of these men when she's with them, but when she's not with them, she claims to love the other one. I don't know. So she's not very trustworthy. Well, okay. So at one point, she and Paul are in an embrace, right? They're together. They're actually on the property she shares with her husband in his hunting cottage where he has his rifle collection. Okay, now let's think about this. If you're going to have an affair with somebody's wife, are you going to choose as your your trysting place, the location of his gun collection? I don't know. That doesn't sound like a very good idea to me. But anyway, that's what ends up happening. And so John, the husband, catches them. And there's kind of this long, drawn out scene. And sure enough, he gets one of his rifles. He's kind of showing off his rifle and he's cleaning the rifle. And when you know, it goes off and he shoots Paul. Paul very dramatically falls back. He's on a couch. We see him sort of fading away, but he doesn't die immediately. He's dying very slowly. And while he's dying, Ethel and John, they kind of cook up this plan where they're going to claim, when the authorities come, they're going to claim that, well, no, it was just an accident. I mean, he was cleaning his gun, right? And that was sort of the plan all along. You know, he wasn't just cleaning his gun for fun. He was cleaning his gun and then, oops, he shoots Paul. Okay, but then that's when something kind of crazy happens. Plot twist, Paul starts to laugh. He stands up, and it turns out he wasn't shot at all. John missed him. Now, there's a big dramatic scene at this point. Paul walks out of the room, and he leaves Ethel and John behind. They're kind of confused, and we do kind of get this idea that maybe John feels a little ashamed. It's very awkward. But anyway, Paul, alive and well, he walks out of the room. Okay, now we see Paul outside of the cottage, and he's making his way to the cab that's waiting there for him. Plot twist, again, he collapses. He was shot after all. Back in the hunting cottage, when he said he was fine, that he wasn't shot, well, he was just acting. In fact, the tailcoat has a bullet hole in it, and his shirt underneath is soaked in blood. Now, here's the good news. Paul doesn't die. We don't see him again, but we do hear that he's in the hospital, and apparently he's recovering. And, you know, here's some more good news. Ethel's true nature is now obvious to all, and Paul is rid of her forever. Okay, this was a good story. I did not see that second plot twist coming, the plot twist where Paul actually was shot. You know, also, something else kind of cool about this is the whole acting theme. You know, acting, the manipulation of reality, that was a theme in this story. Ethel was acting when she was with both men. You know, she lied to both of them. She was a rather poor actress, but Paul, on the other hand, was a master. As the story opened, he had been shot on stage and died very dramatically. But at the close of the story, he acted as if he had not been shot. It was exactly the opposite there. You know, there was also some cool filmery in that scene just prior to when Paul was shot. You know, as the tension rose, we couldn't see their faces. All we could see were their hands. So we saw Paul, and he was kind of clutching the front of his tailcoat, and we had Ethel wringing her hands. And then John was caressing that rifle in kind of this weird sort of, dare I say, sensual way. It was very strange. And then bang, the gun went off. Well, that story was a good one, and it was a strong start to this film. I really liked it. Okay, so now let's get to that third story, the one I'm calling The Kindness of Strangers. Here we meet Charles Smith. He was an unknown classical music composer. He was sort of struggling. We see him at the beginning. He's playing piano in an empty bar, and he's playing things that he doesn't really want to play. He wants to play the music that he composes, but he's just kind of eking along, you know, trying to make his living where he could. But a friend of his arranges for him to meet with the famed conductor Arturo Bellini. Now, when Bellini hears Charles play his composition, he's pretty impressed, and Bellini actually offers Charles an opportunity to conduct the premiere of his own work at Carnegie Hall. Well, this is great news. But at the last minute, Charles is informed that he must be properly attired. Oh no, he has nothing to wear. Well, his wife quickly runs to the secondhand shop across the street and gets the tailcoat for him. What tailcoat? The tailcoat. The tailcoat that's been in every story. Okay, well, he puts on the tailcoat, but it's way too small for him. It's really tight. So when he's conducting, and he's waving his arms around and everything, it rips. It rips at the shoulders and in the back. It's really obvious. Well, the audience just explodes laughing. Charles is brought to tears. Oh, this is so heartbreaking, honestly. At first he thinks, gee, there's something wrong, they must not like my composition. This audience is not reacting the way he had expected them to react. But then he discovers that his jacket's been all ripped up, and he's so embarrassed that it devastates him. He just kind of collapses on the stage. Well, that's when the magic happens, right? That Bellini stands up in his concert box, and he removes his own tailcoat in kind of this dramatic fashion, and he asks him to please continue.
Continue. Please.
Well, one by one, the gentlemen in the audience remove their own tailcoats. And Charles ends the evening triumphant. It's really this beautiful scene because you look out in the audience, all the men have taken their jackets off. It was kind of like this moment of solidarity and support. Oh, I really love that. We had the support of the entire audience. One of the things that we see in all of these stories is that both the cutter and the tailor were correct. The cutter had said the jacket would bring misfortune to all who wore it, and that's true, it did. There was some tragedy in each one of these stories. In the case of the composer, it fell apart on him, and it threatened to completely eclipse his life's work. But the tailor had said that the jacket would bring good luck. And that was true too. So in the case of the composer, he was a hit. Everybody loved his composition. So in all of these stories, there was both tragedy and triumph. Okay, well, let's take a brief intermission. And when we come back, I'll give you my official rating. Back in a moment.
It's intermission. Rise and stretch time. Time to refresh yourself and visit our snack bar. Got a yen for hot popcorn? Your favorite soft drinks are sparkling cold. The juicy Frank sizzling hot. There's delicious coffee, freshly brewed, and all kinds of ice cream and candy to tempt you. Showtime will be announced loud and clear to get you back to your car in time. So stretch your legs. Come to the snack bar now.
Attention listeners, it is time to learn how Jennifer rates movies.
Our scale is pretty simple. We classify a film as either unwatchable, watchable, or rewatchable, or somewhere in between. An unwatchable film is really bad, so bad in fact that it's hard to sit through. It's either boring or stupid or cringy or just plain terrible. Now, a watchable film is one that's basically okay. It gives you something to do for a couple of hours, may have some interesting and entertaining parts, but it doesn't really leave a strong impression on you. A rewatchable film, on the other hand, is one that's so good, so meaningful, so impactful, so riveting, so thought-provoking, so emotionally charged, and/or so beautifully produced that you would invest the time necessary to watch it again. So there we have it. Our scale is unwatchable, watchable, or rewatchable. Now, I have a worksheet that helps me calculate the rating. I essentially award points, or what I call diamonds, to films based on 5 factors: story, character development, Writing, so that would show up in a film as dialogue or narration. Pace, and discussability. Now, when I'm considering discussability, what I'm basically doing is answering the question, does the story have enough depth to explore and analyze through discussion? Because, that's the fun part.
It's that it.
Yes. No. One last thing about my rating system.
I thought we were done.
This is my system. I'm not a film student. I don't really know anything about film. The factors I've built in are those that I care about. I don't watch or read other reviews, so nothing influences the way I feel about a film beyond the film itself.
It's that it.
One more last thing.
This overview is dragging on.
When reviewing a film, I try really hard to stay within the confines of the story. I don't consider the historical context of the film, when it was released, and I don't care about the biographies of the stars or the filmmakers or anything like that. The story itself is the thing that I care about.
It's that it.
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure of it. That's it.
Well, then, let's get on with the show.
I liked Tales of Manhattan. As I mentioned before, I actually liked it more than I liked Flesh and Fantasy. So let's kind of break it down. Story. Was this an interesting and entertaining story worth telling? I'm going with 5 diamonds here. I actually switched my original rating. I originally gave it 4 diamonds, but you know what? These stories were really entertaining. All but the last one. That one was just kind of goofy, but I really liked most of the other stories. Did they convey profound truths about life and the world and all of that? Well, maybe not, but they were good, entertaining stories. So 5 diamonds. Character development. Were the characters dimensional? Did their actions ring true? I gave this 3 diamonds. Now, we're dealing with 5 stories in the space of 2 hours here. There just isn't a lot of time to get to know the characters well. But even the characters that we did get to know, such as that story with Ginger Rogers and Henry Fonda, the one where Ginger Rogers finds out her fiance is having an affair, things evolve just too quickly in this story to be plausible. And, I don't know, that was kind of true in some of the other stories as well. Particularly that story at the end where the money falls on that community from the sky. Those characters were almost like caricatures. They weren't very realistically portrayed. So I went with 3 diamonds, mainly for those 2 stories that we talked about, because I thought those were pretty good. Well, and also, Edward G. Robinson as that down and out lawyer. I think there was genuine humanity there, and you could really pick that up in the characters. So I'm going with 3 diamonds on that. Writing. Was the dialogue beautiful, funny, poignant, and/or thought-provoking? I'm going middle of the road here with 3 diamonds. There's just not much to say about the writing. It was good. It was fine. Nothing great, nothing all that memorable, but also, just like last week, the writing did not get in the way of the stories. Pace. At what speed did the story unfold? I went with 5 stars. I thought it was just right. It went along just the right speed, not too short, not too long. Pretty good. Discussability. I went with 3 diamonds. You can talk about these stories. I think there's more to say about them than there were the stories in Flesh and Fantasy, but not very long before covering everything there is to say about them. So just going with 3 diamonds there. Okay, so that gives us a score of 3.8 diamonds. Okay, now let's compare that with Flesh and Fantasy. What did I give that film? Okay, it looks like I gave Flesh and Fantasy 3.2. So yeah, that's a little bit of a lower score there. I think that's about right. Okay, so my official assessment of Tales of Manhattan is that it is watchable. I do recommend it, though. Flesh and Fantasy is one that you could probably skip, but Tales of Manhattan, I think that's a pretty good one. You know, if it's a cold, rainy night, you're under the covers, you're looking for something good to watch, I would go ahead and check out Tales of Manhattan. And as I mentioned before, it is out on YouTube. You can watch it for free.
And now it's time for Idel, our trivia.
Okay, listeners, I got a new trivia question for us this week.
Oh, Jennifer, excuse me.
Sure, Lorenzo, what's up?
I believe you owe me an apology.
Apology? Well, Lorenzo, I did already apologize to you earlier today.
Yes, but I think my fans would appreciate hearing it as well.
Your fans?
Yes, they are crying out for justice.
Your fans are crying out for justice?
Yes, they are organizing a protest.
A protest? Well, how many fans are we talking about?
A lot.
A lot? Does that mean 3 or 300?
More than 3.
So, 4?
About 4. Yes.
4 fans are organizing a protest.
Yes, unless you apologize.
Okay, well, you do have more fans than I do, I admit it. So, okay, listeners, I would like to take this opportunity to apologize publicly to Lorenzo. In our last episode, I mistakenly told Lorenzo that he had answered our trivia question incorrectly, when in fact, he had chosen the right answer. I misread the question and didn't catch that until earlier today. So, Lorenzo, I beg your pardon.
Okay, I pardon you. But let's do the question over again.
Oh, you want to do last week's question again?
Yes.
Okay. One of the stories in Flesh and Fantasy, that would be the second one with the guy who's told he's going to kill someone, is based on a story entitled Lord Arthur Saville's Crime by 19th century Irish poet and playwright Oscar Wilde. Several films have been based on the work of Oscar Wilde. Here are 3 films from Hollywood's golden age. Which one is not based on a story by Oscar Wilde? A. 1938's The Lady Vanishes, B. The Canterville Ghost from 1944, or C. 1945's The Picture of Dorian Gray. And the answer is...
The Lady Vanishes.
Well done, Lorenzo. Are we okay now?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, how about if we move on to this week's trivia question?
I'm ready.
Okay. An anthology film is defined as a movie containing multiple stories, each of which is complete in itself and distinguished from the others, though they may be tied together by a single theme, premise, or author. One of the earliest anthology films, if not the earliest anthology films, dates all the way back to 1916. But the heyday of anthology films were in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Which of the following movies from Hollywood's golden age is an anthology film? A. West Side Story from 1961, B. South Pacific, the 1958 film that's based on the book by James A. Michener's Tales of the South Pacific, or C. Walt Disney's Fantasia from 1940. Do you know this one, Lorenzo?
I'm thinking.
Okay, well, go ahead and take a moment. Time's up. What do you think, Lorenzo? Which of the following movies is an anthology film? A. West Side Story, B. South Pacific, or C. Fantasia?
West Side Story.
No. I'm sorry, Lorenzo. The answer is Fantasia.
Maybe you should look again, to be sure.
No, I was especially careful this time around. You really were wrong this time, Lorenzo. Fantasia is an anthology film that consists of 8 animated segments set to pieces of classical music.
I'm still not convinced.
You're never going to trust me again when it comes to this trivia game, are you, Lorenzo?
Probably not.
As I'm recording this, the Academy Awards is a hot topic, and in fact, when this episode comes out, the Academy Awards will be right around the corner. I think it's just a few days from when this episode is released. Now, our film this week, Tales of Manhattan, wasn't nominated for any Academy Awards in its day, but I already know which film we're going to be featuring next week, and that one was. In fact, it received a record 14 nominations, something only 2 other films in history, Titanic and La La Land, have ever done. Well, I'm talking about the fantastic All About Eve, starring Anne Baxter and Bette Davis. Now, All About Eve won Best Picture in a year that had some extraordinarily stiff competition. We'll go into this in more detail next week, but I think its most threatening film, or its most threatening rival rather, at least in my opinion, was Sunset Boulevard, which was a masterpiece. I mean, honestly, can you imagine an award season in which All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard were both up for Best Picture? Well, we'll be covering Sunset Boulevard in a future episode of this series. Well, this week I came across an article that pertains to Sunset Boulevard, or more specifically, to one of the actresses in that film that was nominated for an Academy Award, Nancy Olson. Now, here's the title of that article. Nancy Olson, 96, says her Oscar-nominated role in Sunset Boulevard made her leave Hollywood. And then there's a quotation, "Movie stars are sad creatures." Wow. And then there's like a little subcaption that says, I said, "I'm sorry, I cannot be a movie star," the retired actress said in a recent interview. Now, this is from people.com, and the article was actually published just this week on February 7th, 2025. Okay, well, I'm really intrigued by this article, so we need to kind of dive in here a little bit. They start with 3 bulleted main points. First, they say that Nancy Olson received an Oscar nomination for her role as Betty Schaefer in 1950's Sunset Boulevard. Despite the acclaim, Olson said in a new interview that the movie's story of Hollywood mistreating a former star made her turn away from the industry. I think what she's meaning there is that the story seemed a little too true for comfort. I think that's what she means. Okay, and then last bullet says, Olson said she learned that movie stars are sad. They're without happy families and happy lives. Okay, sidebar here. I think she's probably right. I mean, I don't know. Don't you get that impression? Especially today. Well, not even especially today. Maybe always. I mean, I don't know if you can find a more unhappy group of people than Hollywood actors and actresses. I wouldn't want to be a movie star for any amount of money in the world. You know, it seems from afar that their lives are very often mired in dysfunction and confusion. I don't know. That may not be true for all of them, but I don't think I would ever really look to them as models of virtue or as influencers unless I really did my research to find out how well they managed their own lives. Now, before we dig deeper into this article, I have to mention that I loved Sunset Boulevard, and I do think that Gloria Swanson was robbed of the Best Actress win there. But as far as Nancy Olson goes, I'm not really sure about her. I mean, she was good in that film, but not really memorable. I don't really remember that much about her. Now, I do remember Celeste Holmes' performance in All About Eve. That was much better, and they were nominated in the same category, Nancy Olson and Celeste Holm. I thought Celeste Holm was much better. But I don't know. What do I know? Nothing, probably. All right, so let's see what this article has to say. It's not often that your first Oscar nomination makes you want to turn away from acting, but that's what happened to Sunset Boulevard star Nancy Olson. Olson, 96, opened up about her experience with the film and its effect on her career on the February 6th episode of the Hollywood Reporter's It Happened in Hollywood podcast. I did not expect to win, and I did not win, Olson said in the podcast. I felt very rewarded for being nominated, and that was quite enough. She added that she had a feeling she wouldn't win when she was seated at the back of the audience. Yeah, that might be a giveaway there. Still, she said, Gloria Swanson and Billy Wilder was the director, they should have won. And while she said that the competition included some wonderful movies, she also said Sunset Boulevard has outlasted them all. Now, I think it outlasted most of them, but I don't know. All About Eve has held up pretty well, I think. What movie is better? I don't know. I would probably give the win to Sunset Boulevard, but All About Eve is pretty good too. So I don't know. I'm not sure where I would land on that one. Okay, back to the article. The movie's legacy, she said, is that it reveals the truth about Hollywood and the movie industry. It was built on commodities to sell, she says. This is a quotation. And the commodities were the actors and the actresses, and they were made bigger than their reality. They were figures that were used to sell the motion pictures. Therefore, they were made more beautiful, more desirable, more sexual than it was possible to be. Yeah, I mean, I think she's right there. Olson guessed that the movie was widely snubbed at the Oscars because members of the industry were uncomfortable at how it exposed that reality. And because it exposed that reality, Olson ultimately realized that she didn't want that fame for herself. Movie stars are sad creatures, she said. I understood Norma Desmond, and I wanted a life. Okay, so Norma Desmond is the character Gloria Swanson played in Sunset Boulevard. I knew that movie stars had a period of time and then they were thrown away. She said, what more did I need to know about than Norma Desmond? I'm a doctor's daughter from the Midwest, and I said to myself, how many movie stars are happily married, have children, are part of larger families, aunts, uncles, cousins, those kinds of things that were my life? Well, nobody. So I couldn't imagine existing in that world. Okay, well, now here's the thing, though, that I'm kind of curious about. In this interview, she makes it sound like she made a conscious decision to leave Hollywood on principle. But is that true? I mean, Sunset Boulevard was not her last film. In fact, it was only her second film. She made other films, but she never really reached superstardom. Had she reached superstardom, you kind of wonder if she would have still clung to those principles. You know, there's something literally intoxicating about fame. I think once people get a taste of it, they'll sometimes go to greater and greater extremes to get more of it. You know, fame becomes the primary objective above artistry or expression. You know, maybe an actress goes into acting because she's artistic, but that kind of falls away and the fame becomes the bigger objective. Now, I don't really know what was in Nancy Olson's heart, but I do always sense that Hollywood is a really dangerous place. It's a place where it's very easy to get lost, to lose yourself. So if she really did walk away on principle, well, good for her. Okay, back to the article. Olson appeared in more films in the 1950s, but by the mid-1960s, she had mostly pulled away from acting. From 1950 to 1957, she was married to Broadway lyricist Alan J. Lerner, with whom she shared 2 daughters. I moved to New York, she said. I don't want to be a movie star. And they said, well, wait, we're going to renew your contract. You'll get a much bigger salary, a lot more money. But she said, no, I'm sorry, I cannot be a movie star. At that time, she worked 11-hour days, 6 days a week. I was so tired, she said. Well, I don't know. Maybe she was a bigger hit than I knew. I'm going to go over to Wikipedia. Give me just 1 second here because I want to see what else she was in. Okay, here's what Wikipedia says. Her pairing with William Holden in Sunset Boulevard was considered a success, and she appeared with him in 3 other films, Union Station, Force of Arms, and Submarine Command. Now, the second and third released the following year, but none repeated the success of Sunset Boulevard. Other film credits include several films for Warner Brothers, such as Big Jim McClane, from 1952, So Big in 1953, and Battle Cry in 1955. Olsen also made several appearances in films for the Walt Disney Studio, The Absent-Minded Professor in 1961, and Son of Flubber in 1963. She also appeared alongside Haley Mills in Pollyanna in 1960 and with Glenn Ford in Smith in 1969. She was also with Dean Jones in Snowball Express in 1972. Olsen then moved to New York City, where she appeared on Broadway. And then she also did some work in television. But it seems that her career really peaked with Sunset Boulevard. And as I said, that was only her second film. So she peaked pretty early in her career. Okay, well, there's a little backstory on a one-time Academy Award nominee and maybe a little bit about the darker side of that experience. Let's take a quick look at the 2025 nominees for Best Picture, since the Academy Awards are right around the corner. The 97th Academy Awards are set to take place on March 2nd, and the nominees are, oh goodness, there's 10 of them. There's quite a few. Okay, Anora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune Part 2, Amelia Perez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. And now for my prediction. Yeah, I have no idea. I haven't seen any of these films, nor do I plan to see any of these films. I have no idea what they're about. I actually watch very few contemporary films. Now, I did hear that Wicked was very good, and Cynthia Erivo, who is in that, I think she plays the witch in Wicked. She's up for Best Actress, and I heard that she is also very good. But as far as predictions go, no, I have no idea. And I don't watch award shows, including the Academy Awards, so I may never actually know who won. Listen, I'm just an old film enthusiast. You can't look to me as any kind of an expert on films of yesterday or today, clearly. So, Lorenzo, will you be watching the Academy Awards?
I might tune in just to see the commercials.
Well, no, Lorenzo, the commercial thing is for the Super Bowl. I don't think there are any big commercial rollouts for the Academy Awards.
Oh,
Yeah, like 120 million people tune in for the Super Bowl. I think only about 20 million people tune in for the Academy Awards. I don't think that's a big enough audience for the high-dollar commercials produced for the Super Bowl.
then, no, I'm not going to watch.
Yeah, me neither. So what are you going to do instead?
Probably play fishdom.
Oh, yeah. That might be what I do too. Well, I think that does it for this week's show. Hey, listeners, it's looking like the majority of you are tuning in on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It is so shocking to me that we have any listeners at all, so I can't thank you enough. But I'm also trying to see if we can attract some kind of following on YouTube. Right now, we have no following on YouTube. If we can build up that audience a bit, I might force myself to produce more content in the form of additional videos. But you know what? You can listen wherever you'd like, whether that's YouTube or Spotify or Apple or whatever. I'm just glad you're here. All right, well, have a great week, everyone. And when your week is done, come on back and see us again real soon. Say goodbye, Lorenzo.
Goodbye, Lorenzo.